Hey everyone, my name is Doug Wilson, and I've been working on Express for quite a while now. And so I just wanted to kind of come here, and Mike wanted me to come and tell you all about Express, and especially how we've been working a lot on some governance kind of stuff, and how we've been trying to improve the project management since we got moved into the Node.js Foundation earlier this year. So I want to start off real quick, just in case anybody doesn't know what Express is, just give a little overview. So Express is a Node.js web server project. So it's one of a bunch of them. There's plenty of them around. It has been around for quite a long time. The first commit was actually made back in about the summer of 2009. And then it was first published to NPM about winter 2010. And back then, I was a user of Express before it was even on NPM, in fact, back way, way long ago. Was never involved in the project till quite some time later, but I've certainly been using it for, feels like forever. And Express is actually pretty simple. It's really just a routing plus sugar layer on top of the actual base Node.js HTTP server. So Express itself isn't actually a server. It's just basically a way that this gives you a little bit of extra on top of what you get by just doing http.createServer in Node. So it gives you declarative routing. So you probably, if you've ever used Express or seen it, you're very familiar with app.get and app.use. You just declare basically what you want to do real quick, and without making a big switch or if statements in a one big function. It pretty much extracts that away into the basic middleware pattern. So that basically is what the core of really Express has been. So it's certainly a very basic middleware pattern, but it pretty much works for what was needed to be done, and it's what helped make Express a large community, excluding the longevity that it's been alive for. So Incubating Project. So Node.js Foundation had taken Express.js in back in the early 2006. They call it an incubating project. What that means is it's basically, it was actually a fairly new thing. I think we were one of the first ones into it. If not, I think maybe still the only one, I'm not sure. But it basically, it doesn't really change Express itself, but what it tries to do is it tries to take a project like Express and basically help them with governance. So for example, we get mentors to help guide the project. We have 2 mentors that have been assigned from the Node Foundation, which is Michael Rogers and James Snell. It helped outline the project governance. So for example, before it really just had no governance at all. It was just whatever, the person in charge just happened to say, which has moved through few people from the original author to, at the time, I think it was basically myself at that time, but now we have a project governance, and we just took that from the Node.js Foundation they had for their incubating project. They actually had a big outline of a very basic one, and we just incorporated that into our project. We helped use that to determine what our founding core contributors were. So over time as well, people have contributed to the project, people have been active, people have become inactive for various reasons. Maybe they moved to a different language, maybe that they were doing Node primarily because that was what they did at work, and now their job changed. Either they went to a new company or not, and there's, they don't have an interest in it anymore. So we took the what was stated in the governance as what it took to basically be in the project, and we applied that as metrics to the project to figure out who our base contributors were at that time, basically for the last bunch of months since we moved in there, just to get here's this group of people, let's start the conversation about all this governance stuff with this group here so we can get something kickstarted. And really the goal of this whole thing is really to what they call graduate, which is basically saying this project has a good governance in place, it can graduate. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean it moves out of the Node.js Foundation or not, but it's certainly not an incubating project anymore. So they actually have a set of metrics in there that determine how you can actually graduate. And I mean, the high level is that it's a participatory project, it's transparent, and it's effective. And so when we meet that kind of stuff, we can apply to graduate, and then we'll figure it out. But otherwise, while we're here, we have our mentors, which of course we can always talk to anyways, but it's a very nice thing, and they gave us a lot of starting points. So I mentioned that we started with that core contributors. So we made like a thing, it was part of the governance just by default. It's like called technical committee, which some of you may be familiar with that term from Node Core as well. So it's basically just a group of people who guide the project. So it's not necessarily decision makers or yes or no. It's really just like essentially like a guiding. I think that there's like a technical steering committee as well in Node Core. They're a lot bigger, so they have more structure. Ours is pretty simple, just committee or just contributor or committer, sorry. So we just meet every other week to discuss just topics. We'll always meet, but we may or may not have pre-arranged agenda depending on what happened between the last meeting and that meeting, and then we'll talk about whatever needs to be talked about, either new ideas, things that we saw, because most of us are all subscribed to everything that happens in all the repos, so we always see everything. So we'll either talk about like just different things that were brought up, issues, or does it align to like our philosophies? Do we want to change philosophies? Talk about this governance stuff, which is a lot of the stuff as well, just over the last bunch of months. We'll also go and we'll make decisions if there's objections. So if, for example, because Express does a lot with code, if there's maybe some kind of pull request or other kind of issue that's just been there for a while, it's not getting resolved by itself in the comments, then we can always specifically bring up that and talk about it. So we'll sometimes specifically bring it up just to say, oh, cool, let's iterate on this idea. This is awesome, and let's do this next. Or, hey, this doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Let's at least, what do we think about this? And then we'll like put our thoughts in there so we can figure out what we're going to do, which is also, I think, the Node Core TC does as well. And then, like I said, we'll discuss new topics and align in direction for where we want to take the project. So here we actually have 9 TC members currently. So I've put them up here so everybody can see. They are Blake, Rand, myself, Yapa, Linus, Nick, Troy, Jonathan, and Jeremiah. So these were the original founding TC members that we had made based on our metrics, and it hasn't changed since then. There's a couple stages for how people get into the TC, which is the basic right now is become a committer, and then the TC nominates that person and into the TC. And I think it's very similar to Core, since that's where we took our stuff from. And we just haven't had the opportunity just yet, but soon we might. So that's a lot about that. I just wanted to also talk about some of the stuff where what the organization is for Express. So a lot of people, when they hear Express.js, they think of just like the NPM module called Express or the GitHub repo that is that NPM module. But Express itself is actually like the project, which is what's in the Node Foundation, is really all of its pieces, which was split into 3 GitHub organizations due to management over a year ago. So those organizations on GitHub are Express.js, which is basically the main project. You'll find our website code is all hosted there, expressjs.com. We have a discussions repo in there. They have this new thing that they just introduced. You can pin repos to the top. So those are the 3 pinned to the top of our GitHub org is the Express.js website, Express repo, and the discussions board, which is just an empty repo for just kind of just some discussions that can stick around longer than like a Gitter conversation would. And Pillar.js is our next one down, which is basically we just because we decomposed a lot with Express 4 when it came out quite a long time ago. We had all these pieces that had to go somewhere. And we felt like putting them all in Express.js, which is where they were, started getting really messy. It's actually kind of nice to just go in there, and it's basically just the obvious things that most users would use. It's just the middleware plus Express, basically. So pillars are basically our next one down. It's basically meant to be our components of Express that make it up. The tagline is the build your own HTTP framework. So it's like the framework to build your own HTTP framework kind of was the idea. So for example, we have the core router is in there. So like you could get that app.use, app.get, and all that stuff without anything else. You could just use that if you really wanted to. Then the last one is JS-HTTP, which is our low-level JavaScript HTTP-related modules. So that has a whole bunch of stuff that was just like little wheels. A lot of people will never use that most of the time. Module authors, though, may use that a lot more than people who just actually just write Express applications. So we have lots of random things in there, a lot of like HTTP-based things, so especially like a lot of parsing and serializing modules, like parsing and serializing cookies or content types or content disposition or the range header and a bunch vary header and stuff like that. We have like some weird like conveniences. So because this is built on top of node.js HTTP framework, there are some functionality you think is logical, but you have to like add like 3 event listeners, and then when another event listener fires, you got to add a couple more and manage all that. And so we had kind of wrapped that up in a couple modules as well, and we just stick it there. And to kind of give you a little visualization, I tried to put together just a very, very simplistic little tree of just that would fit on like a slide and be readable of expressing some dependencies. So just kind of like show you kind of like what we logically were trying to like put these 3 orgs in the layers. So like at the top would be the Express.js org. So that has Express itself and its middleware, which are not actually dependencies of Express, so I didn't bother putting them up there. And then pillar.js is basically would be the next level down. So we have the module called router, which is the Express router. We have the send module, which is another popular one for people to direct require, that has all of our logic for reading files off the file system and then sending them out and bundling that up. That has things like cache checking for 304 not modified responses, and cleaning up, making sure the file descriptors are cleaned up, doing some things like sending partial responses for a ranged request and a couple other neat things. And another example is final handler. So that's basically the final handler. So all the different things in Express, the different functions you can put are the handlers. And so this is the final one. This is one if it gets to it, it'll just send a 404 basically. And if an error is handed to it, it'll serialize that error out and write it out. And Express uses that as well. That's how it does those defaults 404 page or the default error page if you don't put anything yourself. And then underneath that would be the JS-HTTP. So for example, like the send module, we'll use a couple other modules like the etag modules. That's how it will just hand some information over and it will just calculate a simplistic etag. It'll send data from the request and what it's about to send out to the response together to this module called fresh. And then that module will say, yes, you need to send the whole thing back as a 200, or no, you can send back a 304 not modified. It just has that little logic bundled up. And then it has, another example is the range parser module. So, you need to parse the ranges for those conditional requests or those, yeah. And then final handler, for example, we'll use onFinished, which send uses as well to do things like clean up things on the request. So that's one of those ones where you have to add a bunch of event handlers to go get this same functionality. And so we just wrap it all up for you. So that way you can basically, for example, send, we'll use that to make sure that no matter what happens, no matter when the event listener was added, so if you somehow you invoke send after the request is already done, we still realize, oh, that request was done. We need to actually go and like close that file descriptor for you so it doesn't just hang open. which used to be a problem, for example. And so that's why we bundle up all these things. So we get a lot of questions about what Express 5 is. So Express 5 is very much really, you can think of it as a marketing version. That's what a lot of people like to know, major versions. So we try to kind of like bundle a bunch of things together into the major. I mean, they're typically all breaking anyways, but rather than each breaking one incrementally coming out, especially because there's so many books and all kinds of things on there, you know, a lot of people use it for a lot of applications. Like myself, like, you know, I'll use it for all kinds of applications. And, you know, if a new major comes out, you know, every time you turn around, it can get difficult to keep track of everything. So Express 5 is, of course, coming. I mean, people always ask for it, but, you know, we're making sure that it is not only ready, but actually has a good enough significant feature set that makes it somehow distinctly different to actually really say there's a difference between them, instead of like there's these random things here and there that are not compatible, versus, you know, not. So for example, native promise support and routing is the biggest one. So that will actually bring, if we get that done, that will actually bring Express into the new I think 2017 stuff that has the async functions. So async functions just return a promise. So essentially, that would actually add native async functions directly into Express's, all its middleware and handler could be those native async functions, and it would just automatically work. And so we actually have a few different PRs and discussions going on about exactly how we're going to implement that in a way that won't be completely destructive to the entire ecosystem, to get that out there, but have it really awesome. But, you know, we want everything to just kind of work as well. We're working on improved template rendering system. So we have right now, if anybody's used it, there's a template rendering system. It's actually fairly basic. There's a lot of issues with it. For example, we actually synchronously will read the file off the disk for the first time. In production mode, we'll cache the content so we don't actually read it over and over again. But still, that needs to be reworked. Improved query string handling we're working on. So right now, we parse query string. It's kind of lacking. You can't really. It's an application level thing. You can't. It always parses even if you don't need to use it. A lot of that. And actually, that's pretty much mostly done right now. Improved cookie handling. So Express will actually allow you to set cookies, but you can't read it. You can't even read cookies by default from Express, which is kind of nonsense. Which is hard, especially when you need to read the same format that Express was writing. So we're going to get all that hopefully bundled up together. There's new route syntax additions. A lot of people will use, you know, the string paths for routes. It's the colon, you know, like foo kind of syntax. We've made a lot of tweaks around there based on a lot of feedback. And so it's not strictly backwards compatible, which is why we have to kind of wait for Express 5, because it's kind of tweaks here and there for the syntax. Some weird edge cases won't work anymore and stuff, so we'll have to come up with a migration guide for that. Potentially something like the jQuery kind of migrate module, which would detect it automatically for you. And we're going to decompose our project structure some more. So yeah, and I want to end it on just talking about a little bit about kind of like a lot of stuff we've been trying to do to get more contributors. Like we've been working a lot with project documentation. Like we have a lot of goals that the Express project is, but they're just like in the people who run the projects' minds, right? We're trying to get them like written down on our website, for example. Contributing guides. So we have some basic ones from the foundation, but we're trying to get them a lot more beefed up to be much more specific to Express itself. The organizational structure I was just sharing with you earlier, so we're working on like a way to actually have that on our website. We just started putting in a lot of those supplementary modules, the READMEs, directly on our website. That was fairly recent, so we're trying to make it look much more unified. Better location of resources, which we've mostly done now. We even have our YouTube channel, which is our every other week meetings is up, a link on there. And we're working on some level up guides for specifically how you become a committer and become a TC member. Those are in our governance, but it's very wishy-washy, so we're trying to see if we can come up with way more specific ways that you can do that. So yeah, thanks everyone. I hope you really enjoyed hearing a lot about Express and its new governance.
Thanks, Zen.